Alright, let's nerd out a little bit. In a fantasy world, or sci-fi for that matter, if you could have one superpower for use in sword fights, what would it be? Would you pick super strength, being able to tear out a tree and swing it around as a club, or being able to haul all kinds of heavy equipment around? Would it be a healing factor, or alternatively super toughness, so you can just shrug off the enemy's attacks because either you have some kind of natural armor, or any injuries will just knit themselves back together in seconds? Or would it be something else? I mean, there are plenty of superpowers that would be really useful in a fight. They would all have some kind of advantage. Well, not all of them. Being able to solve math problems at superhuman speed, or being able to communicate with animals wouldn't be terribly useful in a sword fight. Although, to be fair, Squirrel Girl did take down Dr. Doom, so maybe the animal communication would be useful. But either way, personally I would pick super speed. It seems pretty underrated. Well, it depends on who you ask. There are plenty of fans of The Flash, for example, who say that he's the most powerful hero in the entire DC universe. And I've talked about that a little bit in another video, but there is more to discuss, especially with regards to sword fighting. So if you think about martial arts, how do they work? How do you win? It's essentially a matter of observing the opponent, anticipating their course of action, and then performing the appropriate counteraction. Picking whatever technique will defeat that. And if they respond to that, also adjusting and doing something else, of course. So it's essentially a bit of a game of chess. Certain moves beat certain other moves. Now that applies mainly if the two combatants are at roughly comparable speed, or generally aren't too drastically different in terms of physical capabilities. If one fighter is vastly physically superior, a lot stronger and quicker, they may overwhelm somebody even if their technique isn't watertight, so to speak. It's important to note that skill can also improve speed. If you perform a technique kind of sloppily, for example, if you do this wide swing, you cock it all the way back, and then there comes this hugely telegraphed, clumsy swing, it's going to be much slower than a very direct cut. If you eliminate as much unnecessary movement as possible and just go for the straightest path, you are going to be quicker, of course. However, if you had the ability to multiply your speed by some kind of artificial external means, be it magic or what have you, that would change the game quite a bit. Generally, when it comes to speed as a superpower, I would also assume cognition at super fast speed, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to benefit as much from it. Your mind needs to be able to keep up with your body. If your body moves at extreme speed and you cannot coordinate it because your brain lags behind, that's not terribly useful. It could have some use if it boils down to essentially super reflexes. So if you just automatically respond and your body does something before it's even consciously processed. However, that can also be a problem. It depends on whether it's a good or a bad reflex. If you've trained sword fighting enough, then it might be a good reflex. Your arms might just snap up into a guard. But if you don't have that, then if we think about the most natural instinctive reflex that people have when they're struck is kind of throw up their hands and just kind of cower like this, maybe even turn their head away, something like that, which of course would be very bad. So that would be self-defeating. The other option would be super fast cognition. So you're not actually faster than anybody else in your physical movements, but everything seems to occur in slow motion to you. So in that case, hopefully you have an on and off switch for that, so to speak, because that would make daily life really difficult and frustrating. But assuming you can just turn that on, that would also be tremendously helpful. In fact, that would be much more helpful than super reflexes, in my opinion, because even if you're limited in your movements, being able to perceive everything at a very slow rate gives you plenty of time to think and form a plan. So, for example, say if you start a cut and you see that your opponent also starts a cut at the same time. Usually that would result in a double hit unless you're performing a particular technique like a wrath cut where you cross the line more strongly and kind of blow through their strike. It's getting into too much detail, but generally, there are plenty of situations where if both strike at the same time, or for example, if one thrusts and the other cuts, they might hit each other, which means both die, essentially. So if that happens, this would be extremely helpful, because as you swing, you notice, oh, they're doing something. So now you can actually stop it and redirect it into something else and deal with that. Pick the appropriate counter technique for that situation. If, on the other hand, everything is at super speed and you can just crank up both the speed of your thinking and your movements, that's a major advantage. In fact, that's the greatest advantage you could possibly have, in my opinion, because now you have all the time in the world to figure out what's going on and what the appropriate response is, and then you can execute it so quickly that your opponent can't even respond and can't even adjust in time. You could even use that with a lot of deception, if assuming that you can not just turn your super speed on and off, but maybe you can kind of, like a slider, you can regulate how much it's multiplied. You could, in that case, throw a cut at normal speed, like just start the fight at normal speed so your opponent doesn't even know what's going on. So you throw the cut, and then as you do it, you kind of crank up the speed. And of course, defense would be really easy because you see it coming very slowly. You have all the time in the world to step aside or do whatever evasive movement or defense you want. You could just casually walk past your opponent's blade, or even lazily push it aside, and then do whatever you want to them, essentially. If they have superhuman power, well, yeah, so what? They strike very hard. Doesn't concern you if you don't get hit, right? I mean, to be fair, technically superhuman power should also result in increased speed if the muscles are capable of more of an explosive push. Like if the legs are really strong, and pushing them off will result in a very fast lunge forward. That could be useful, but that would already be kind of combining two powers here for the sake of argument. If your opponent is heavily armored, that also wouldn't be a problem, because you essentially have all the time in the world to dodge their attack, step up to them, and jab your blade into the eye slit of their helmet, for example, or anywhere really. All kinds of armor has weak spots somewhere. At the very least, at the eyes, usually under the armpits, for example, and the joints. Superhuman toughness, depending on how far it goes, could be a problem. Like if even their eyeballs are too resistant for you to pierce, then okay, that would be kind of an impasse. They wouldn't be able to defeat you, you wouldn't be able to defeat them, but at least with your super speed, you could just get out of there easily, right? And you could probably even pickpocket them in the process. Also, with super speed, you could hit really damn hard, because kinetic energy is a matter of mass and velocity. So if you can increase the velocity dramatically, then that will deliver much more kinetic energy to the target. If you think about using a sword on horseback at full gallop, it's a similar principle. The velocity comes from the movement of the horse. You don't even need to necessarily swing the sword. If you just hold it out at a full gallop, it's going to do damage, just due to the velocity of the moving horse. That also applies to bicycles, by the way. Okay, so that's the power that I would personally use. I'm sure you can come up with a number of others who would be more useful, arguably. Like, for example, if you have telepathic abilities that you can use to convince your opponent to not attack you in the first place, and then suddenly they like you and whatnot, you don't even have to fight, which makes it even easier, of course. Or if you can fry their brain just by looking at them, or if you can summon meteors of varying sizes and let them precision strike the enemy, or if you can summon a demon army, whatever. There are plenty of options, but among the kind of more basic powers, this is the one that I would go for out of super, speed, strength, toughness, etc. I mean, it would give you the ability to dodge those meteors and lasers and fight the demons and all of that. So it's a pretty good deal in my opinion. Either way, I hope you found this entertaining, and thanks for watching. By the way, if you want to help keep the channel going in these post-apocalyptic times on YouTube, I'll leave a link to my Patreon page down below, as well as a Teespring store where you can buy channel merchandise. Anyway, see ya, have a good one.